The story began with the joyful shouts of the townspeople, who one by one welcomed the newly engaged. On this day, the crown prince of the Efferento Empire, Yalos Orna, and the only daughter of Count Psyche, Polly, announced their engagement. The voices of satisfied people did not subside, but among them there was one who was not at all pleased with this engagement. The girl stood alone, far away from everyone, and clenched her teeth tightly and was angry, because this place was once hers. After a successful engagement, the newly married couple said goodbye to everyone with smiles. They were waiting for a vacation just for the two of them. Some of the guests began to say that Lady Polly had lost the right to fight for the title of princess. However, the prince himself made a preference for her, and this is not surprising because the only rival was a girl from the ducal family who at one time planned an attempt to kill the imperial family, but those were rumors. One of the lords said that this case was deliberately publicized so that the prince would choose Psyche. The interlocutor tried to calm the man down because such a thing should not be said, but he did not calm down. He assured that at this rate the prince could simply cut off all relations with the house of Belial, because the end had come for them now. The man added that it would be difficult for a girl with such a character to marry. However, the man assured that he himself would not mind asking for her hand in marriage. The gentleman did not have time to negotiate, because the other covered his mouth. Medea herself heard their entire conversation. Belial and the girl's gaze became too murderous. Passing by the men, one of her servants recommended not to pay attention to these commoners and return home as soon as possible. The lady did so, but her look suddenly became very sad. The man wanted to apologize for his words and explain everything, but he did not have time. The girl stopped abruptly and turned to the stranger and said in a cold tone that she remembered his face. Finally, the lady got into the carriage and it started down the street. The men stood silently for some time and looked at the carriage's trail. They were sure that Medea should have punished them, but this, fortunately, did not happen. One of them fell to the ground in relief. When the lady's carriage disappeared between the houses, he resumed his song, saying that as he had said, the end of Belial had come. The comrade fell silent. In the end, the gentleman said that the friend should be more careful, because silence could be scarier than 1,000 words. The next day, the townspeople talked among themselves about the death of a man who apparently slipped and fell. All was not well in the Belial estate either. Walking down the corridor, Medea met her brother. The girl immediately asked how her mother was feeling, to which the boy replied that not very well. Already together, they went to the mother's room. The room was quiet. The doctor standing next to him did not dare to say a word, but the head of the family told him not to be afraid to tell the news. In the end, he reported that his wife's illness had worsened. The man said that it happened after the woman was in prison, because of which it will be difficult for her to live this year. The father was not jokingly angry, and the doctor paid with his life for this news. Having found herself in her room, surrounded by maids, the girl did not stop blaming Polly for everything. One by one, the maids offered different options for getting rid of the enemy, wanting to punish her. However, Milady did not want to rush and said that you need to be very careful, because with that man it will not be easy to get rid of Psyche. Moreover, if something happens to her, then the prince will come for her head. Medea's anger did not subside, because she guessed that her rival was with the prince right now, and she was not mistaken. While on vacation, the newlyweds strolled through the streets and got to the market. The girl approached one of the counters and began to examine the goods. To the prince's questioning look, she replied that she would like to give some kind of gift to the duke's daughter. His Majesty did not understand this. Belial caused a lot of trouble to his bride, but she was so pure that she did not hold any grudge against her former rival, and assured that she wanted to be the first to take a step towards reconciliation. Suddenly, the voice of the seller was heard, who began to praise his goods. It was a precious thing made from minerals that can only be found in this place. The girl came closer, interested in the product. Suddenly, the prince laughed, and the bride and the seller looked at him questioningly. The boy did not mean to laugh at the product itself, but he became very interested in how Medea would react when she received the gift. And Milady finally got it. A beautifully packed box was on the table. The girl did not react. The servant who brought the box came to personally make sure that the gift had been unwrapped. Hearing this, one of the maids exclaimed about the tactless behavior, but Milady stopped the servant by assuring her that it was not difficult. In addition, it was the order of a girl who received the title of princess. When the girl unwrapped the gift, disgust could almost be seen on her face, but she did not say anything, only put the box aside and said that she would definitely thank the princess for this gift. The servant promised to convey this message to Polly. When the door closed behind him, all the anger Medea had been holding back came out. She grabbed the lamp that was close at hand and hit it hard. The girl did not stop stroking her until the maid finally stopped her because the lady's hand was bleeding. Lady Belial stopped in shock, but not because of the wound, and forced herself to calm down. In a moment, she began to get angry again, looking at the ring that fell out of the box and rolled on the carpet where it fell. Milady could not help herself at the impudence with which Polly dared to present this thing. For Medea, such a gift was a challenge from her rival, because even with such primitive actions, she was able to win the crown prince. Milady stood up announcing that she accepted this war. The journey was over, and Psyche had already returned to her father's palace. The girl was already getting ready for bed, but her nanny still did not calm down and kept asking the lady how the vacation went and whether everything was fine. Suddenly, a servant entered the room and announced that a gift had arrived from the house of the Belials, which had been sent by Lady Medea. Polly quickly accepted the flowers, which contained a small note, and began to read. In the letter, the former rival said that the smell of these flowers will help the lady fall asleep, so it is better to put them near the bed. She also wrote that she would like to meet soon to talk. The girl assured that she would like to fix all the problems that existed between them. With these words in the letter, Psyche was moved and slid to the floor with joy. The servant was surprised that Medea had written such words. However, the lady did not seem to pay attention to the servant's words. She was only happy that her sincerity had finally reached her rival. The girl quickly ordered to prepare everything for the meeting. Lady Belial was not really as sincere as she appeared in the letter. After she wrote that letter, she stared at the jar in her hand, disgusted that naive Polly had fallen for her hook. The day of their meeting has come. Psyche apologized to the lady for informing about the meeting with such a short message, because tomorrow she had to go to the temple. Medea assured that there were no problems in this. Milady said she had bought some tea leaves, so she offered to try them. Eventually, the tea was made and the girls savored every sip, but Belial watched the process especially intently. The servant, who was secretly watching the tea party, was sincerely surprised that the two rivals were just quietly talking to each other. This was somewhat alarming, but no one wanted to interfere, and they quickly fell silent. Medea had keen hearing and therefore immediately heard the servants whispering among themselves about their meeting. She told her rival that the servants loved her very much because she treated them well. Polly thanked these words as a compliment, but the lady instantly became serious, informing the latter that it was no compliment at all. She was angry that they spoke so carelessly. The lady wanted to take their fault, defending her servants, but before she could finish, their conversation was interrupted by one of the knights, who asked to end the meeting, because tomorrow the lady had to go to the temple. Medea was finally able to meet the knight, who was highly valued by her rival. He was from a family of knights who, almost from birth, took an oath to faithfully serve Psyche, ignoring even the emperor. After hearing such a contemptuous request from the knight, my lady had no intention of staying in this palace for a minute longer, so she clinked her cup and got up from her seat and proudly sat down in the carriage. The knight was watching her from the balcony all the time. When Milady left, the boy asked one of the maids where their lady was now. The maid replied that she was in her room, barely holding back her tears. The maid went to the lady's room to make sure that she was all right, but when she entered, she saw that the lady was lying next to the bed, barely conscious. The maid was worried and quickly called the rest of the servants. They helped put the lady on the bed, but the girl had a high fever, which grew worse by the minute. The frightened servants wanted to call a doctor, but the knight did not allow them to do so. No one understood what was happening to the lady, because a few minutes ago everything was fine with her. The knight could not allow an unknown doctor to be called, because it might appear that the lady was ill. This could not be allowed, because then, on the day of the prayer that takes place once a year, Duke Belial's daughter will be the only one standing in the temple. At this, the knight quickly gathered himself to settle something. It was already deep evening in the yard. All this time, the knight galloped alone in the forest, as if running away from someone. Suddenly, his horse stopped and neighed, throwing off the rider. Frightened by something, he ran away. He began to call the horse, trying to turn it, but the animal no longer listened to him. The blow from the fall was quite strong, so the boy was not able to get up right away. Suddenly, a shadow appeared in front of him. Hearing a familiar voice, he quickly looked up and opened his eyes wide in surprise. Before him stood Lady Medea, but he did not know how she ended up here. In her hands was a bloody sword. The only purpose of this night walk was to find out what really happened to Polly. He was sure that it was the handiwork of his opponent, but he did not understand how she beat him, because he checked everything. He was a bit scared because he was defenseless. The girl smiled slyly and asked him whether he had really served Psyche since childhood. The knight did not understand what was being said, his voice trembled. Before he had time to say anything else, his chest was filled with indescribable pain. Milady rushed at him with a sharp movement and pierced the boy's body in a flash with her sword, not even giving him the opportunity to dodge. An ominous smile lit up her face, and her gaze became insane. The girl informed the barely alive opponent that his lady would answer for everything and feel the pain she felt when everything was taken from her. In the end, Milady explained that the smell of flowers by itself was not strong, but combined with sugar cubes and poison, it became deadly. She laughed as she continued to explain all this to the dead knight. A man's voice was suddenly heard from behind the trees, and a boy came out into the light. He asked the lady if she was acting too openly. Approaching the body, he noticed that the enemy did not even have a sword. Medea didn't waste time on idle chatter, so she immediately asked him if he had prepared everything. Heli confirmed and asked with a sinister smile if Psyche was dying, to which the lady replied in the negative. The girl knew that her opponent would be cured in the near future, but that was exactly what she wanted, because everything was going according to plan. Meanwhile, Polly could hardly find the strength to eat even a little. Her hands would not obey. Eventually, the lady got much better and was finally able to go outside. After the door closed behind the lady, the servants began to fuss. They were worried about that knight who ordered them to be silent. One of the maids wanted to tell about everything, but the other forbade her to do so. Another of the servants raised his voice and said that it would be worthwhile to find that knight, to which one of the maids raised her hand. She assured that she knew the local forests very well, but she was still not let go, and another one of her colleagues was sent. The boy was sure that something had happened to the knight, because he certainly could not get lost. The colleague suspected that the knight had probably already died, but he did not tell the servants. Suddenly, the maid stopped him, pointing to someone standing in front of them. The boy took a closer look, noticing the knight's clothes. It was at this moment, in the temple where the annual prayer was held, that the priest said a prayer, and after it, he blessed Psyche Polly and put on her a sacred artifact that gave peace this year. Near the temple in which the prayer was being held, another priest informed Medea that on such a day only Polly was allowed to enter the temple. Therefore, giving her the key, he warned her to be careful. The priest said that if it was revealed that he was the one who gave her the key, then his days as a priest would be limited. The girl accepted the key and put on a robe to cover her identity. Nevertheless, the priest trusted her because she was introduced by Marquis Harry. After that, the man approached the hatch and indicated to the lady that this way she could go to the temple unnoticed. Milady looked down. And things were not going too well in the forest, because the servant who was with the maid was badly wounded, the same night they met on the way. The boy understood that the opponent was very strong. He also thought that this stranger could have killed their knight. The young man grabbed the maid by the leg and told her to run away and inform others about what happened here, but the girl escaped. Ignoring her wounded colleague, she approached the Marquis and took his cape. Immediately after that, the girl asked if Milady had said something unusual. Hearing the hostile conversation, the servant was surprised. He remembered that this particular maid was always around and looking for something, but he did not want to believe that she was a traitor, although everything pointed to it. The guy raised his voice to her, trying to find out the truth. The servant tried to appeal to her conscience because their mistress had done so much for this maid. The girl sadly turned away at these words. The Marquis returned to the wounded man and had already prepared his sword. the treacherous maid only managed to say that she had warned her that it would be better for her to leave alone. The Marquis was still slowly approaching the servant, who had accepted his fate. The young man stabbed the servant with his sword for the last time. And while in Polly, one by one, what she valued was taken away, the girl herself silently brought prayers to the altar in front of the statue of an angel, asking all the saints to grant peace and prosperity to her subordinates. Medea approached her, but Psyche was not at all surprised by her appearance, and the lady noticed it. She pointed this out, but the crown princess did not answer, because she was only interested in the fate of the knight. Asking questions about her knight, about his fate, she rushed at Belial and pressed her to the floor, but the lady did not resist. Polly began to bombard her with questions and accusations. She knew that her rival hated her for the fact that she managed to take away the trust of the crown prince, but she did not see her fault in this because she knew that Medea did not love her fiancé, but only his title. Milady did not intend to have this conversation and did not want to share her feelings with the crown princess. She was still angry that the fate of an entire empire was in the hands of such a naive, ignorant girl. Belial pushed her opponent away because she did not see the meaning in this conversation and wanted to get down to business, but she somehow misplaced her hand. She staggered and fell into the water. Polly didn't have time to grab her. She began to sink, but suddenly realized that she could breathe underwater and did not understand why. She thought that it was the power of God, and therefore she wanted her prayer to be heard as well. While Medea was getting more and more absorbed by the water, she saw someone's hand that was trying so hard to reach her. It was Polly who, without a second thought, rushed after her to save her. However, even despite this merciful gesture on the part of her opponent, Belial still prayed that the god would hear her prayer and help take away everything from Psyche, especially the possibility of being a hereditary princess. It was at this moment that something strange happened, and in a moment she lost consciousness. She woke up already lying in bed, and worried servants were swirling around her. Medea was sure that it was not her servant. One of the maids was surprised by their lady's interested look, but the other one ignored it and told everything that she was very scared for the lady. The girl did not understand who these strangers were. The only thing that interested her now was what happened in the temple. The older woman kept crying, not understanding why all the troubles happened to Psyche. Hearing this name, the girl jumped up and ran to the mirror. Seeing her reflection, she almost lost the gift of speech, because looking at herself, she saw that she had really become Polly's Psyche. She thought it was all a dream, but almost immediately pushed the thought away. The crown prince burst into the room. The servants wanted to stop him because the lady had just woken up, but the boy ignored them. Milady immediately looked back at him, surprised by his unexpected arrival. He immediately rushed to her and, taking her hand, said that he was glad to see that she had regained consciousness, because he was very worried about her. Medea was shocked by such a display of warm feelings, but did not remove her hands. After that, the prince embraced his bride, saying that the lady who was guilty of this incident will be severely punished. When Polly heard these words, she was overjoyed to hear it. She wanted to laugh. Meanwhile, the real Lady Psyche also woke up and saw in the reflection a face that was not her own, and did not understand why she was now looking directly at my lady. She thought it was a dream, but realized it wasn't. The girl could not understand what was happening, and thought that it was some big misunderstanding. So she left the room she was in and tried to go outside, trying to get back to her house. In the prince's palace, Medea tried to behave like her rival, but it was very difficult. She almost made a mistake when the groom asked her about the punishment for the enemy lady. Although she would have liked to immediately order the execution of the perpetrator, she understood that such wishes were not Polly's true wishes, so she carefully pretended that she did not want punishment for the lady. The prince sighed with regret, but he was ready for this, knowing the good heart of his bride. A strange noise was heard in the corridor, and His Majesty asked what was happening there. Medea tried to break through. She wanted the servants to inform the prince of her arrival, but they restrained her and did not let her inside. Tired of this noise, the crown prince himself went out into the corridor and pushed the girl away from the door. The crown prince was very angry with the girl who dared to come here in person, even though she was the one to blame for what happened. Nevertheless, he made it clear that it was dangerous to be here. Medea covered her mouth so as not to laugh out loud. This situation was so funny for her because, looking at the prince, it could seem as if Psyche was his only love. The prince acted as if he saw no point in life without Polly. However, this caused great doubt, because the groom could not even recognize his beloved in another body. It was both funny and sad. From that day on, Lady Belial was forbidden to even come close to the Earl's palace and Psyche herself. When Medea finally accepted the whole situation, she slowly began to come to her senses and first examined herself. While she was inspecting the rooms and everything around her, accepting her new position, a maid came up to her. The same one who turned out to be a traitor. This is exactly what the girl wanted to talk to Milady about. The maid confessed that she was actually a spy in her house, but had no choice because she had 6 sisters and brothers who needed to pay for their treatment. Told the truth about the death of the knight. She also confessed to the death of one of the servants, but believed that now Lady Belial was finished. Polly, listening to the maid's confession, only held her close, uttering words of sympathy. Of course, while she was listening, she had thoughts of tearing out the tongue of this insolent maid and feeding it to the dogs, but she decided to leave it to fate, and if everything came back, she would kill her. If everything remains as it is, then he will have mercy on this girl. Dawn passed, but Medea remained in the body of her rival. She looked out the window, pleased with this turn of events. Now she understood everything. In fact, it turned out that their souls had switched places, and therefore God granted her wish. But I did not know whether it was God's will. The next day of prayer was a year later, but she was not sure that she would be able to return. Polly sadly remembered her loved ones and the crown prince. She didn't want to believe it, that she was cursed to live in someone else's body all her life. In fact, she knew that Lady Belial had many enemies, and she was stronger than all of them put together. But not Polly. She understood that she was actually much weaker than her opponent, and therefore she was firmly convinced that she would not be able to overcome all this. The girl understood that she would die as soon as she showed the slightest weakness, but she did not know what else she should do to survive. The fact that the lady was weak greatly oppressed her. A maid came into the room. The servant carefully approached the lady's bed. She carried a tray with her and said that she had brought some food, because Milady had missed all her meals today. The servant's voice trembled very much. Due to the fact that the maid was very worried, her voice broke and she thought that the lady was already very angry and was waiting for punishment. The lady extended her hand and the girl was already preparing to strike. However, no blow followed. In fact, Medea smiled warmly and thanked the maid for such experiences. The maid stood for some time and could not utter a word from surprise. After a moment, the maid's eyes filled with tears, and she calmly said that it was not worth the thanks, because she was just doing her job. In a high mood, she also said that she would clean the bed. Meanwhile, the Marquis tried to send a letter to Lady Medea, but she again refused to accept it, although Heli was not too surprised. However, it had been going on for 7 years, but he was sure that everything was fine. But still, something was bothering the Marquis, so he decided to visit Milady, even though his butler had brought some documents that needed to be arranged. The boy was not even worried that the lady could scold him or even punish him for wanting to come to her so simply. But the butler himself understood that he would not be able to detain him. The butler still worried about the young lord because there were various rumors about Lady Belial, but if something concerned her, the Marquis immediately became very sensitive to it, but he did not know the reason. And while the Marquis went to visit the lady, the real Medea was just trying on a new necklace that the crown prince had personally sent her for the girl to wear on her birthday. The maids helped to dress. The girls couldn't contain their joy about this gift and praised the lady to whom this thing suited her. One of the maids drew the lady's attention to the garden, in which the trees planted by the count had already blossomed. The lady really wanted to go for a walk to get some fresh air, because the walls in the room were already pressing on her. The crown prince also decided to go with her, but the girl asked him not to worry too much. The prince smiled warmly and asked the lady to call him by his name, because they had been engaged for a long time. The girl cheerfully agreed. Medea was satisfied with everything, because everything went according to her plan. She was almost awake and saw how after the prince's birthday they would officially get married, after which she was already waiting for the emperor's death to become one of the 2 suns that will shine over the empire. However, something troubled her, She was treated very well, and this could not help but cause inconvenience. For one more step towards the main gate would arouse suspicion, but she had to inform Hela. Milady had an idea and asked to let her go to the market in honor of her recovery. Besides, she had some other business there. The prince hesitated, but finally allowed the bride to visit the market. At the bazaar, the girl bought a bird messenger, after which she became a little aloof from everyone. Now she had to politely wait for the prince, because he did not allow her to be present at the important conversation. The girl was somewhat alarmed by such caution on the part of the prince, so she decided that it was only because she was not yet his wife, but still she very much wanted to listen to this conversation even out of the corner of her ear. In the end, there was nothing to be done about it now. She could not influence her to be accepted, so she decided to read for the time being, because she was in the library right now. The lady took one of the books and started reading. After a while, the prince himself returned. He apologized for the delay, but Polly only smiled warmly and said that time had passed so quickly while she was reading. The crown prince laughed at what he heard. Milady was very surprised by such a reaction. She did not expect this at all. Yalos took the book in his hands, reading the title. He said that it was indeed a good book, but that he thought it too difficult for my lady. The prince coldly said that if the lady wanted a picture book, he would just buy her a fairy tale. Medea did not believe what she heard, because these were not the words of a person who loved, and the look was contemptuous. Psyche was confused and did not understand where she was. There was only darkness around, and the light from the candles did not help. Suddenly she saw a light and was already heading there, but someone stopped her. The girl noticed some hands trying to reach her. The voices kept shouting why the lady was pretending to be their Medea, because she was not. Psyche was shackled by fear. She wanted to justify herself. A prince appeared out of nowhere. The boy drew his sword and said in a calm, cold tone that he would take her head off and slowly began to approach the lady. The girl wanted to scream out of fear. She wanted to run away, to hide, but the hands reaching for her finally grabbed her and did not let her move. Polly begged to be saved, but no one heard her pleas. In a moment, the sword reached the lady. The girl immediately woke up from this horror, and the sun was shining in her face. She opened her eyes and saw the maid, who greeted her with a smile while cleaning the room. It was just a dream and nothing more. After the prince so cruelly laughed at her ability to read, the girl fell silent. Yalos wondered why she was silent, and in a moment tears fell from the lady's eyes. She asked him for forgiveness. Milady wanted to tell him something, but was too shy to say it out loud, so the prince leaned down and she whispered the truth to him. The prince exhaled and said that it would be better to talk about it elsewhere. With that, they got together and headed home. While riding in the carriage, she thought about the truth that really was, and not the truth that she told the prince. And the truth was that she lost her memory due to fainting. And to be more precise, she recalled some memories with difficulty. Everything was as if in a fog. It was as if someone had ripped all the memories into different pieces, so for a while she thought that reading would help. Arriving home, the prince began to apologize for his words. He hugged his bride tightly, and she also started to hug him. Everything looked as if Yalos was taking care of her, but they were thinking about different things. Polly was troubled by the dream she had last night, but it wasn't the first time. She wondered what caused these dreams. She thought it might have been guilt. A maid came into the room. She was smiling and informed that she had brought the lady another bun for tea. The lady noticed that even at the beginning the servants were somewhat wary of her. The reason was a sudden change in the character of their hostess, but they opened their hearts very quickly, as if they had been waiting for this all along. The Duke rarely appeared at home, and his wife was ill. Psyche did not know how long she could remain unrevealed as long as everything remained the same. She sent Milady a letter, but never received a reply. There was only one person to avoid, and it was about this person that the messenger came to inform that he would soon arrive. The Marquis was already on his way to her palace. The maids covered their mouths from surprise, and the lady herself looked frightened. Yes, she knew about Helio too, Travimus, a young Marquis who was now the sole head of his family after losing his parents in an accident when he was only 14 years old. He was not even given time to grieve, and the greedy nobles tried to do something about the boy, which led to the almost complete ruin of his home. It was during this difficult time for him that he met Medea. Following her instructions, he quickly regained his role as the head of the Travium family, and in his adulthood, he was already surprising society with his considerable success on the battlefield. After that, his family flourished. Psyche knew that Medea and Helio had already been dating for 7 years, so she was not sure that she could deceive him. She herself had never personally communicated with the Marquis because of his ominous aura. When the boy got out of the carriage, a smile immediately shone on his face. He was glad to meet Milady after such a long period. Polly sparingly answered the greeting because she knew that she had to restrain her emotions. The Marquis imperceptibly began to look around. He understood that his worries were in vain because everything around was calm, but in a moment he realized that this silence itself was too suspicious. Belial distracted his attention. The man came up to congratulate the Marquis. He seemed glad to see the boy visiting. The young man was also happy to meet, but Polly saw Medea's father for the first time. Psyche realized for herself that she was glad to see the Duke because he distracted the Marquis, whose look became very angry for a moment. The girl thought that the boy could have guessed about the exchange of bodies. The lady hoped that the Marquis and the Duke would continue their conversation somewhere else, but she did not expect that the rival's father would offer Helio a duel with his daughter to cheer her up. Even the servants were happy to see such a sight, so everyone went to the arena. Polly tried to detain the Duke, but he no longer heard her. Suddenly, someone lightly pulled her hair. It was the Marquis. He said that he had never seen Milady braid her hair like that. It was the first time in his memory. Psyche panicked. These words cut her like a knife, but she tried to avoid the conversation. She eventually changed into the appropriate clothes and entered the arena, but she still wanted to run away because she understood that it can be easily exposed. The girl had never held a sword before. Helio asked Milady to be more gentle with him. Polly was even more saddened by what she heard, because in front of her was the best swordsman in the Empire, and he made such a request. The lady could not even imagine how strong Medea was when such requests were made to her. Compared to her, Psyche was like an ant. She didn't even know if she could lift the training sword. She concentrated, she had no other choice. The lady took hold of the hilt of the weapon and raised it above her head. Surprised by this, she almost exclaimed aloud that she had succeeded, although she still did not understand how. The girl couldn't help herself from great luck, and thought that it was thanks to the very strength of Lady Medea that she was able to raise the sword. However, Polly still did not know how to properly hold a weapon. The Marquis noticed it. The boy couldn't help but remember that it was Lady Belial who taught him how to properly hold a sword, and later how to fence. He had not forgotten these lessons that she had given him, so it was surprising that the lady did not know this. He quickly approached and grabbed the lady's sword in his hands. Marquis said that the sword is held with 2 hands, so it is surprising that the lady does not know this, because the real Medea would never make this mistake. After he asked who she really was, the girl's hand began to shake violently. The lady could not believe that she had been exposed. Polly did not want to die, so she began to think about what Lady Belial would do. The girl thought for a moment, remembering all their meetings, during which she carefully watched her rival. Adopting her usual pose, making a serious face, she raised her head at the Marquis, scolding him. Milady did not like that the Marquis addressed her as you. The boy took a step back from surprise, but Milady pointed her sword at him. Psyche did not want to retreat, so she continued to advance. However, if the girl did not try, the Marquis noticed that she played this role too well, so he was sure that before him was not Lady Medea. Nevertheless, some doubts began to creep in. Looking at her, he could not understand who was in front of him then but his lady. Helio slowly began to approach, pressing the sword closer to his neck. Blood dripped from the wound. The young man asked to punish him. For a real Lady Belial, that might have been fine, but Psyche couldn't take it any longer and quickly put the sword away. Trying to keep herself in her hands, she said that they would end there. The servants who had been following them all this time began to whisper. They had never seen blood shed on the training ground. Dvoretsky, too, has never seen it come to this. Milady ordered that the Marquis's wound be treated quickly. After treatment, the boy was going to go home. In parting, he apologized for his behavior, and Polly again diligently portrayed her rival. However, he did not want to say goodbye on this. He had one request, as the Marquis knew. A week later, the lady was to be present at a banquet, so I asked if I could act as her escort. The lady was a little stunned, but looking into the Marquis's eyes, she noticed that they were red. It seemed as if he was about to cry. Touching his face lightly, she smiled and happily agreed. As the Marquis's carriage disappeared outside the gate of her house, Polly looked down at her hands. They were still shaking, so she grabbed one to stop the shaking. The lady could not believe that she had succeeded in everything. The lady stopped herself for a moment because she realized that it was not her merit, but Medea's. Nevertheless, the girl felt a strange rush of strength, which she liked very much, and also some pride in herself. By the time the Marquis reached his mansion, it began to rain heavily on the street. The butler went out to the meeting and wanted to cover the boy with an umbrella so that he wouldn't get wet, but Helio just passed by. The man asked how the meeting went with the Marquis, to which the young man mumbled something at first. Then he said that it was all strange, because Medea had called him by his first name for the first time, which she had not done since he was of age. Heli is the last name she always used. The guy clenched his hand tightly into a fist. He understood that something had definitely gone wrong, but he could not fathom when exactly everything had changed so dramatically. Late night came. In the house of the Psyches, Polly was getting ready for bed. The maids circled around her trying to calm the girl down, because she couldn't sleep because she was very worried about the upcoming wedding. Instead, the maid could not contain her joy to see all this action, because guests from the whole empire were to gather. There will be music and a grand feast, with their lady and prince in the center of attention. The nanny of the crown princess did not understand why the maid was more worried about this than the lady herself. The girl could not explain it, but they left Milady alone after saying goodnight. Medea, left alone, no longer needed to scrunch up her smiling face. She immediately became serious and somewhat angry. It was very difficult to continue this masquerade. She was fed up with it. These maids were getting very bored. The girl even thought of removing them all, but still refused this idea, because she understood that all this would become unnecessary as soon as she married the prince. The lady sat down at the table and looked at the utensils. Everything was prepared: bird, leaf, ink, and lemon juice. She used it as ink because it will help to write a hidden letter. Such a letter can only be read if you place the paper over a fire. The lady guessed that Heli must have guessed the strange change in her behavior by now, but he definitely didn't know about the swapping of bodies. In the letters she wrote, she described in detail all the events that took place. It will be the final piece of the puzzle. Polly took the bird out of the cage and carefully attached the paper to the crow's foot, and the bird flew to deliver the message. However, he had time to fly far. Almost immediately, someone noticed him and instantly killed the poor animal. Reading the letter, the man guessed its secret. The crown prince carefully read everything that was written in the letter. He ordered the servant to report, and he reported that he had seen the bird as it flew out of Lady Psyche's window. The letter was addressed to the Marquis. Satisfied with the maid's service, Jalos praised the boy for a job well done. Thanks to this, they were able to intercept this pathetic letter. He ordered to burn the paper and to go to the count tomorrow. However, everything was not as simple as it seemed, because Medea knew that she could be followed, so she sent the first letter a fake one. She already knew that right now the prince was supposed to intercept him. The real letter should have already reached the recipient. In the morning, a cat came to the Marquis. The boy took the animal in his arms, surprised by its appearance, but in a moment he noticed a piece of paper on its tail. Meanwhile, Polly was preparing for the arrival of the crown prince. The maid consulted quickly next to her, trying to put the lady in order as quickly as possible, and at the same time being indignant that the prince had decided to come so suddenly. Even without knocking, the prince entered the bride's room. Fortunately, the girl managed to get dressed. Yalos did not waste time on greetings, but immediately decided to get down to business to talk. The girl invited him to morning tea and began chirping happily, rejoicing at his arrival, but the prince was annoyed by this silly conversation, because he knew that the real purpose of his visit was not for this. The lady confessed that she had seen the prince in her dream last night, so when she heard from the maids that he was to come, she was very glad. The guy tried not to get angry, but on the contrary played along with the bride and smiled. However, in a moment he leaned sharply towards her and threatened her in her ear to stop communicating with Lady Medea quoting some words from the letter he intercepted yesterday. Polly was worried. She covered her face with her hands, pretending that she was very sorry for this. However, in reality, she knew that she was constantly being watched. But there was a strange moment when the prince appeared. Then all the servants who were with her all the time suddenly disappeared. In this way, she understood that the prince's spies did not see Psyche as a threat at all, which is why they behaved so carelessly, but all the better. The benefit was that thanks to this factor, the girl would be able to explain everything. Not long ago, news came from Marquis Helio, which spoke of Medea's desire to restore their friendship. As proof of this, the Marquis handed her a letter containing a fragment of a friendly correspondence. However, on the day of their meeting, due to the unexpected visit of the crown prince, they did not even have time to exchange a few words. After that, Lady Belial offered to speak at the banquet, which was refused because Polly did not answer this letter, but sent it back because she did not want to upset the crown prince. The girl was afraid that by his actions the prince began to consider her pathetic. Yalos did not answer this. He slowly got up and came up and hugged her to show that he didn't think anything of that about her. After that, he let her go and immediately called the servants, ordering them to bring him the jewelry and the dress in which Psyche was to go to the banquet. The servant listened to the order and immediately went to carry it out. In a moment the servant returned, holding a rather large bracelet in his hands. The crown prince asked to give the lady her hand and she obeyed without expecting anything bad. The guy didn't wear any jewelry but just snuggled up. He smiled coldly when he saw that this bracelet was perfect for covering any bruises that might form in the future. The girl was a little stunned by what she heard, not understanding the meaning. The next moment the handcuffs were on the lady's hands. She didn't even have time to react to it. Her reaction bordered on shock. The prince said that Medea was definitely up to something bad. He was sure that this time the thief could succeed in poisoning his bride, so he ordered that Polly be locked in the cellar and that the servants follow so that the lady could not contact the Belial family. The girl begged the prince not to do this, but he ignored her pleas. The servants dragged the lady by force without hearing anything. Jalos stopped them for a moment and turned to Polly with a pitying look. He promised the girl that it would not last long and would let her go right before the celebration began. The guy said that he did all this because of his strong love for her. However, the lady, of course, did not believe in such a method. It seemed absurd to her that the prince wanted to lock his loved one in the basement for the sake of great love. In general, this whole story about the revival of good relations was just to distract Psyche. In her mind, she asked someone to stop the prince, but she saw how the nanny was crying and stopped for a moment. The woman did not shed tears because of her, but because the lady upset Yalos and asked him not to do this. Hearing this, Medea was very disappointed in the servants, although she had not been very pleased with them before. After this, she realized that no one was sane in this house, but she was not surprised. Sitting in the room, the crown prince pondered whether he had acted too cruelly with the poor lady, but not a drop of sympathy could be heard in his voice. The servant who stood by like a faithful dog did not say a word. The prince continued and said that Medea was unlike anyone else in the world. She was the most evil, cunning, and perceptive woman, so there was nothing he could do, and extra measures of caution would not have prevented. Polly was taken to the prison to which the prince ordered her to be brought. The girl looked around. This place definitely didn't look like the cell she was expecting. There were people all around. However, everything did not go according to plan. Someone was knocking on the window of Polly's room. The girl woke up from this but did not understand what was happening. The lady got up from the bed to see what it could be. The unknown slowly walked along the tree. At first, she thought that it was such a strong wind outside that the trees were bending from it. But in a moment, the Marquis entered the room and looked carefully at the girl. The lady stepped back a little. 2 knocks on the right window, which was closest to the lady's bed, meant the appropriate signal, which they had invented a long time ago to see each other secretly. But now in front of him was an unfamiliar Lady Belial. And of course, the girl did not know about this technique. Psyche tried to defend herself with words, but this was not what Helio expected. He calmly invited her to introduce herself to each other again and called her by name. The lady was worried, her hands began to shake. She did not expect it. That the Marquis already knew about everything. He just told her that she took too long to react because the real Lady Medea would have already aimed her sword at him. She looked at him incomprehendingly. Approaching, the Marquis said that if someone else was in front of her now, the lady would be in danger. He also said that there will be many acquaintances of Medea at the banquet. The guy said that even by her movements or behavior she could be exposed, so that this would not happen. He would teach her a couple of lessons. The lady did not understand why the Marquis needed to do this, because he despised her. It could not be said that the Marquis himself was satisfied with this, but he did not pay attention to his feelings. Medea personally entrusted him to protect Polly, so Helio did not dare to disobey the order. Meanwhile, the clock struck midnight, which marked the beginning of a new day. And wherever Lady Belial was now, she heard this bell, and for her it meant that there were 5 days left until the feast began. Something very strong, powerful, and mesmerizing supported this empire, a divine force that acted as an unseen support. The 2 branches of government which took it under their control adopted the name Efferando. The first is the royal family, which was responsible for the expansion of territories in the political arena, and the second is the Holy Church, which sought to maintain stability within. They were somewhat pillars of order. These lands met 2 springs and 2 winters. The debutante, who marked the beginning of the heyday, was already expected by most socialites. However, 3 years ago, rumors about this lady were unusual. Then, at one of the banquets, everyone was very animatedly discussing Psyche Polly, the Count's daughter, because an important day had come for her. It was quite strange, and most people had already given up hope of seeing her face. However, this happened because there were rumors that the girl had some serious chronic disease, but a gentleman denied this, saying that, in fact, there were rumors that the Countess had given birth to a demon. Medea for her personal opinion about this. Such were their roles in society. One was spotted long before its first appearance in humans, and the second had already had considerable influence. She thought, although she already knew the answer. In a moment, the lady answered that many influential people in this way hid unfavorable moments for their family, and some did it with the help of jewels. When she finished speaking her thoughts, there was a moment of silence, but almost immediately everyone began to praise the lady for her brilliant mind. Suddenly, everyone turned to her, looking at one point. Everyone anxiously began to talk among themselves, not believing that the Count's daughter was in front of them. The girl was not at all like the one they knew about in the rumors. Polly appeared bright and smiling. Meanwhile, the lessons that the Marquis had promised to give continued throughout. The boy corrected every movement or word that Psyche did or said. He said that the lady still needs to remember everything well. The girl knew about it, but everything was very difficult. It was hard for her to believe that Medea had learned all these materials when she was 8. Tears appeared in the lady's eyes. The Marquis asked her not to look at him like that. Helio also remarked again that Polly should try better not to show her emotions in public, because Lady Belial always treated everyone coldly. Having said this, the Marquis looked carefully. The boy did not know if the girl would really be able to cope. For all her years, the lady was illiterate in any of the modern sciences, but he noticed that she had instincts that kicked in at a critical moment. Marquis could only hope that the girl's instincts would be able to help. Meanwhile, Medea was still sitting in the dungeon. Looking out the window, she noticed that it was already late evening outside. However, no one came to free her. The Crown Prince was waiting for a report from the servant who had just arrived. The man reported that during this time nothing strange happened in the Duke's place. The next morning at Belial's palace, the Marquis looked at Polly in surprise. The girl was beautifully dressed, but the dress was too extravagant. The lady blushed a little, thinking that she looked strange. Helio didn't mean that. He just warned that right now the girl wasn't a crown princess, and drawing attention to herself could end badly. Marquis helped her do her hair. Polly began to get used to the presence of the Marquis, and therefore was able to trust him in some things. She said that she was really looking forward to this evening, because the prince himself promised the girl to spend time together. And just now the Crown Prince kept his promise. He came to this feast together with his bride. On the girl's arm was the same bracelet which was supposed to hide the traces of handcuffs. They left. Medea was troubled by something. On the day when she had to descend into the dungeons at the prince's command, she expected to see a prayer room or even a dungeon, but this place turned out to be an ordinary room. This room was nothing special. An ordinary cell in which someone once lived. For example, Psyche. She must have lived here her whole life, until the day of her debut came at the age of 19. Sitting in that cell with shackles on her hands, Medea kept asking herself the question, why? How could Polly live in the basement for so long? And most importantly, how did the Crown Prince find out about this room? There was no time to think about the past days now, because the fanfare began to sound in full force, and the announcer announced the arrival of Lady Psyche Polly and Crown Prince Yalos Orn Efferanto at the banquet. The guests began to welcome them. Medea began to look around the guests to find her rival, but did not spend much time on this, because the lady herself was already looking for her, and her look was worried. They finally met, but in different guises. Polly's smile only made Lady Belial want to strangle her with her own hands. But today, who did Lady Psyche really see in front of her? This is what Medea was interested in. A tyrant who stole the love of her life, or a person who put all her problems on her shoulders. The girls continued to look at each other in mute silence. Everyone had something to say to each other. Suddenly, Psyche felt like an electric shock when people around her began to praise the couple of the Crown Prince, but the girl knew that it was only a deception and that she was not in her body at all. She was even more disappointed. The lady couldn't understand why no one had guessed about the exchange yet, since she was the only one who should be standing there right now. Without even noticing it, Milady slowly began to approach the prince. Suddenly, the Marquis stopped her, preventing her from going any further. All thoughts instantly returned to normal, and she looked at him. The guy wanted to bring the lady to her senses and said that everyone was gossiping on purpose to make her angry. He leaned over and whispered reproachfully to her that she must have already forgotten what he was talking about. For now, the only thing they could do was simply watch over the couple from afar. The girl gritted her teeth and listened. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince invited his bride to a dance. Milady accepted his invitation. Music played and they danced. All the guests began to watch this wonderful sight in silence. While circling in the dance, Yalos was somewhat surprised and asked if everything was okay with the lady, because during the whole time she never stepped on his foot. Polly smiled innocently, glad that she had done well. She did not pay attention to the prince's malicious reproaches, but on the contrary played along with him, pretending that she was his bride, but did not even look at him, but kept looking for her rival. Meanwhile, the real Psyche was also watching their dance and could not look away sadly. Medea smiled out of the corner of her ear, listening to the sweet speeches of the prince, and even somewhat surprised by it. However, no matter what beautiful words flew from the lips of the Crown Prince, Milady did not believe any of them. Let him talk about how much he is in the league, but she saw that it was all a deception, because she cannot even recognize a substitute. The dance eventually ended, and they sat down on their rightful thrones. Ambassadors from different countries immediately began to approach them, handing over gifts sent by the rulers of other countries. The guests also welcomed this couple. Suddenly, a servant approached the Crown Prince and informed him that special guests had already arrived. The girl heard about it, but could not hear the rest of the conversation. The guy got up and said that he would be back soon. She promised that she would wait for him. But as soon as the prince disappeared in the corridor, the lady immediately got up and left the guests. The Marquis, who was looking for her, noticed this. Medea invited him to talk with a look. Polly lost sight of the Marquis, so she started to look for him, but suddenly someone called out to her. A fair-haired lady approached her and began to tweet that she was finally able to find her because she had already searched. A couple of other ladies were standing nearby, but it seemed that she was only looking for an opportunity to have more people around to express condolences because she was worried about Medea, knowing some rumors that were going around. The other girls immediately listened and asked what these rumors were. Making an innocent look, the gossip girl said that everyone was just talking about Lady Belial's passionate love for the prince. Psyche glanced at the girl and immediately understood who she was, because the Marquise had already mentioned her. It was the youngest daughter of Count Sayre, who in the past followed Medea everywhere, but was ignored. Annoyed by such behavior on the part of Lady Belial, the girl constantly played tricks on Polly. Once she even spilled tea and started apologizing as if she did it by accident, but it wasn't. Helio, talking about her, said that the lady must have regretted her actions now, because she definitely did not expect to see her in the role of a hereditary princess. Sira was addicted to getting high status. And that's why she didn't bother to do everything to rehabilitate herself in the eyes of Psyche. So the Marquis will not be surprised if the Count's daughter starts making fun of Lady Belial. Polly thought it would be a great opportunity to check it out. The real Medea went out on the balcony and noticed that it was quite windy outside. The girl was somewhat disappointed because she was sure that everything was going according to plan, but she was afraid that she herself had fallen into a trap. It looked like this. It was as if Polly's family was closely related to the Holy Church, but this information was highly classified, which only the imperial family knew about, because even they had no idea about it. The relationship between the two factions was atrocious to say the least, but there had to be a reason Jalos chose Psyche as the crown princess. Everything seemed like a fairy tale about love. However, she knew the truth. There should definitely be something else in this story, something she could have overlooked, missed. The lady leaned anxiously against the railing. These moments did not give her peace. A rustle was heard. Her thoughts immediately disappeared somewhere. She raised her head and saw the Marquis, jumping from branch to branch like a squirrel, descending towards her. Descending, he crouched on the railing. The lady was silent. But in a moment, her face lit up with a smile. She was extremely happy to see an old friend, calling him by his usual nickname, Heli. The Marquis could not contain his joy at this meeting. Tears appeared in the eyes. He finally managed to meet his lady. The boy immediately wanted to tell about how he had been worried about her all this time. I couldn't believe that I was able to see her again. Meanwhile, Polly decided to see if she could really fool anyone other than the Marquis. At Sira's angry reproaches, she only smiled, making a cold face and a disdainful tone. The girl's words did not affect her at all. They even angered her more. So using Lady Belial's facial expressions, Psyche said in a calm voice that she regretted that she had given some slack due to her health. But now she would not want to close her eyes to such a contemptuous attitude on the part of her rival, so it was almost worth giving an order to cut the brat's throat. Sira was no joke, but the others talked. Medea, in an instant, trying to save the foolish gossiper because she could really be in danger of death. The girls stood next to Milady, denying the rumors. The Earl's daughter was indignant at the lady's behavior and said that only a minute ago they themselves had set her up to say this, and now they stood against her. It was quite a strange sight for Polly. Lady Sira, whom she once feared, now looked no better than some ordinary pawn, so she began to believe that if she continued like this, she would definitely be able to live as Lady Belial, and smiled. Suddenly, she heard the other guests talking. They wondered where the crown prince could go. They thought he was going for a walk. People did not stop discussing the prince's joy and warm feelings for Lady Psyche, and the rumors about the wedding completely took away all her strength. She did not understand why she now showed pride and arrogance. Not paying attention to anyone else, she suddenly rushed down the stairs further away. The lady kept running without looking at the road. Everything was swimming in her eyes. She began to wonder if there was any benefit from living like Medea. Look at everyone from a high mountain, kill with a light wave of the hand. She ran outside and found herself in a large veranda. She caught her breath from running fast, and the girls stopped to calm down. She began to understand that all this did not make any sense. Tears came to her eyes from the memories of the person she would like to protect, because this smiling and sincere young man no longer existed. She slid down the wall, trying to hold back her sobs. Psyche no longer wanted this suffering. Life was becoming unbearable. She began to hate everything. Raising her head to the sky, she began to beg for everything to end, and the lady was able to return to her body. In the basement of the palace, where the ball was held on the floor above, the crown prince counted everyone who stood in front of him. Only 5, he was satisfied. They were members of the imperial elite knightly order. The task that the prince wanted to give them was very easy. Even one person would be enough, but he needed guarantees. Their aim was weak. Jalos ordered them to bring the voice of his bride. The crown prince was sure that this crime would remain unpunished for him, because no one would suspect such a respectable person, and he, in turn, would only need to pretend to be indescribably sorry. Meanwhile, Medea told the Marquis about her plans and that she would be able to return to her body in a year, on the day of prayer, if the prince did not marry her. There were no exact guarantees, but she was not worried. However, she did not want to tell him about the mysterious basement in order not to worry her friend, because she saw how happy he was just to be next to her. Suddenly, someone began to approach them, and they became alert. The Marquis had to leave her, but before leaving he put a small package in her hand and asked her to accept it. Then the young man quietly hid behind the treetops, where he could not be seen. Milady opened the package and grunted with satisfaction when she saw the gift. She was glad that the Marquis knew her so well. A woman approached from behind and called out to Lady Psyche, saying that the prince was looking for her. She continued, and said that the crown prince would be waiting for her in the garden because he wanted to give some gift. Helios still heard this conversation. He felt sorry that there was not enough time, because he wanted to convey something else. The guy would really like to say that he didn't care what body Medea was in. She has always been and will be the only person for whom he is ready, without any doubt, to give his life. Meanwhile, he returned to the ball, where he began to look for Polly. The girl was nowhere to be found, and it began to worry. Sira approached him. The lady already knew that the Marquis was looking for her, but the boy did not answer. She was ready to tell where Lady Belial went, but she had one request for him. The girl said that she recently had a conversation and spoke nonsense because of her carelessness. The lady said that her words may have inadvertently angered Medea, which made her angry and went to the exit. Sira asked to order a word for her. Helio ignored it and went in the indicated direction. Meanwhile, the knights hired by the prince went to fulfill their task. They led Polly to a dark forest, and the girl began to suspect something, but the woman pretended. That knows nothing. She said that she was only following His Majesty's order while giving a silent sign to one of her colleagues. He quickly got it and tried to kill Psyche, but she felt something and dodged the blow. The killer was quite surprised by this, because the lady did not look like someone who could avoid death so easily. The girl was somewhat shocked and, after dodging, retreated, falling to the floor. The lady started muttering something in fright. The knight thought that all this was just luck, because he remembered the prince's words about the girl. Medea could not understand what was happening and why she was attacked. She was even more surprised that her body did not obey and began to tremble, although she herself had never been afraid of the imperial family. One of the knights came up to her and, grabbing her clothes, lifted her off the ground. The man asked her not to move and promised that then everything would pass quickly and almost painlessly. He brought the sword over her again and prepared for the execution. There was a sound of cutting. Blood was pouring all around. In the end, the Marquise found the girl. She was still sitting, hiding her crying face, and didn't even notice that someone sat next to her. Helio would never have thought that he would ever see Medea's tears again. He wiped the salty drops with his handkerchief. The lady spoke and said that he must be sorry to see her in such a state. She considered herself a fool for not being able to hold back her tears. Next, she began to praise Lady Belial because she was extremely talented, and she had not yet been exposed, even by a prince. From this thought, everything inside her tightened again, and she turned away. The girl tried to hold back tears, but from the thought of the prince and her helplessness, they treacherously fell from her eyes again. She said that she would soon run away from anything again by wagging her tail. If this happens, then someone will definitely guess how weak a person she was. The girl was worried that she would destroy all the plans that her rival had so diligently built. The Marquis listened. In a moment, Helio said that this would never happen, because that girl was too strong to be upset by something so insignificant. Polly was very surprised by what she heard and the boy's tone. She thought that the Marquis loved Medea, at which the young man laughed. He said that it was strange for him to hear such words from a lady, especially in another's body. She wanted to say something else, but the snow cut her off. The snow that began to fall on the bloodied face of Psyche, to whom an epiphany suddenly came. She was sure that she had moved into the rival's body by the will of the guardian god, who had heard her prayers. However, it seemed that it was all for the sake of this moment. The knight's colleagues did not see what had actually happened, and the woman had already started calling him to stop messing around with the corpse for so long. He kept silent. However, suddenly the body of their friend began to fall, and they saw that he was already dead. A strong and loud girlish laugh suddenly started walking through the forest. The knights were on their guard. The birds were frightened. In front of them stood an unharmed Psyche, although completely covered in the blood of one of them. The girl was holding a dagger in front of her, which the Marquis had given her, and she mentally thanked him for this gift. The female knight frowned. She did not expect that such a weak lady was able to get rid of her friend with just one blow. She couldn't believe that Polly herself was in front of them. The knight shouted to the rest to get ready. However, Medea was much faster and had already put the dagger to her throat. The woman understood. Who will not even have time to get the sword as he will die? The lady started shouting at her, asking who the customer was. She guessed that it could be the crown prince, so she immediately started asking about him, but she suspected that it could also be intruders from another kingdom who had already begun to act. The woman did not answer any of the questions, although she could try to get away with it. The lady was already preparing to kill the knight, but behind her someone suddenly landed and took out a sword. The girl heard it. The knight attacked her in a flash. There was no way he could get the girl, but she repelled the blow, even though she was thrown back a couple of meters. The rest of the knights had time to get their weapons and prepare for the attack. The female knight rubbed the sore spot on her throat. She understood that Lady Psyche wanted to end her. She definitely did not have good intentions, so she understood that they underestimated the opponent. Medea also took a look. She realized that there were no ordinary soldiers in front of her. Nevertheless, these people expected that in front of them was a defenseless lady who had never held a weapon in her hands. Despite this, the soldiers quickly adapted, regardless of the suddenness of the enemy. They were real knights. Now she understood that for sure. The female knight shouted to her companions again in a moment. She warned them not to pay attention to the fact that in front of them is a weak girl at first glance. But it is necessary to fight in such a way that in front of them is an opponent equal in strength. Medea also prepared for battle. If these warriors did not fight hard, there would be no problem to defeat them. However, she remembered how difficult it was to parry one of the knight's blows. Her hands trembled. It was more difficult with such a weak body. Meanwhile, the crown prince had already returned to the ball. One of the gentlemen noticed him and immediately came over to say hello and wish him a happy birthday. Jalos thanked him and imperceptibly began to look around in search of the lady. Not seeing his bride among the guests, the boy smiled with satisfaction. An ominous light lit up in his eyes, and he realized that everything had gone according to his plan, and his bride was already dead. After such a heartfelt conversation, the Marquis finally decided to take Polly back to the hall, promising that now not a single blood would leave her. The girl walked by without saying a word. Still, Helio said he understood her feelings, but he didn't want the lady to give up so quickly. She just needed to be more confident. In addition, he saw that Psyche was somewhat jealous of Medea. Hearing these words, she stopped abruptly. The girl was not going to hide it. Tears appeared in her eyes again. How could she not be jealous of such a rival, because unlike her, she was strong? In the forest, the battle began to gather momentum again. One of the knights began to advance with incredible speed. The girl stood in place, preparing to repulse the blow, but understood that she could not move in a straight line. Physically, she was much weaker than her opponents, and she understood it, so the only option for her to win this confrontation was to constantly dodge the blows, looking for the right moment. When they dodged, she fell a little to the ground. Taking a handful of sand in her fist, she threw it at her opponent, but he covered himself with a cloak in time, mocking this dirty trick. He did not have time to finish. Only a second of delay cost him his life, but before his death, the knight thought about where exactly he could have gone wrong, because he was sure that he had checked in which hand the lady was holding the dagger. Medea told the already almost dead opponent that she did not even want to hear about the dirty tricks of those who dared to attack the defenseless girl in such numbers. She examined the knight's clothes. She didn't notice any emblems on the slain man's cloak, which was strange, but that meant they didn't belong to any order, which only meant one thing. The lady did not have time to think. Others rushed at her. Lady Belial took the cloak she had raised and threw it in the opponent's face, limiting his field of vision. The man quickly tried to throw off the cloth because he understood that every minute could cost him his life. He wanted to try to protect the vital points, but he didn't have time. The girl hit him on the arm, which made him lower the sword. The knight did not expect such speed, which was a mistake. Medea quickly took that life and raised his weapon. Her head was starting to hurt from all of this, but now her only chance to win was to keep dodging the enemy's attacks. And while the enemies were looking for a new point of support, they quickly finished them off with a dagger straight to the heart. In this way, she killed the knights one by one, and those who remained began to fear a little. One of the survivors almost lost consciousness. He couldn't believe that such an elite squad could lose so easily to just one opponent. When he first joined this unit, he did not believe in his happiness. Collecting his thoughts, he remembered that the only person who would be able to stand now in this battle was Marquis Helio, the best knight in the Empire. However, I did not understand where this lady had so much strength. Medea paused for a moment. She understood that no matter how much she killed and tortured these knights, they would never find out the truth about the one who hired them. But she still asked the same question for the last time. The female knight gritted her teeth. Looking at the lady, she did not understand what she wanted to achieve with all this, because most likely she already knew the answer to her question. The rest of the knights rushed at the enemy. While she was fighting for her life, there was only one thought in her head. She wondered at what exact moment she began to hate Psyche. Why did she have this feeling of contempt for her inside her? All this was quite annoying, even sickening from the thought that now she was in such a situation precisely because of her. And also the fact that I had to fight back instead of the one for whom the murder was ordered. The lady thought that the guardian god had swapped their souls so that she would die today instead of Polly, but she suddenly didn't care. The girl was ready for anything because she believed in the changeability of fate. Being still very young, Medea was just getting to know this world. The only person who always stayed close was the nanny. On that day, the girl was promised a surprise prepared by her parents. She had to start classes early tomorrow, so the girl was put to bed. The little lady said goodbye to the nanny and went to the room. One of the maids was unhappy with her colleague because she crossed the boundaries. She did not understand how an ordinary teddy bear could become a gift for a duke's daughter. They could be expelled for this. But the woman didn't care. She just wanted to please the girl. And if they wonder where the girl got this teddy bear from, it will only mean that parents should not sneeze at their child. However, the friend did not understand what to worry about here, because the lady lived well. Medea, who had not yet fallen asleep, heard the maid's conversation. It became clear to her that it must have been difficult to buy this toy on such a small salary. It was unfortunate, because I felt as if I forced the nanny to do this. The next day in the study, one of the teachers tried to bring the Duchess to her senses. The woman wanted her daughter to study literature that was very difficult for a child, and the man tried to explain it. The girl quietly sat next to him, holding the teacher's hand. The man said that a mother's support would be the best thing a child could get, but the Duchess only roughly pulled Medea to her. She only told the teacher that a dear person can become better in any subject while still young. She whispered in the girl's ear that she should become 100 times better than others. To become such a person who is born once in 1,000 years. And for this she needed to study a lot and work on herself to leave her mark in history. These words became a mantra for Medea. No matter what the weather was like in the yard, no matter what time of day it was, the girl studied all the time. She constantly sat in the library and only did what she was constantly studying, even if it cost her health. At that time, the nanny came to pick her up and saw that the little lady was exhausted, but did not stop studying. The girl raised her head. Blood was dripping from her nose, but she asked to be silent. The maid didn't want to look at it anymore. She raised the girl and asked her to worry more about her condition, because she was still young and had a lot of time to study. The nanny's arms were warm. All subjects that existed were given easily, training with a sword too, but the only thing that was unattainable for her was love. She did not understand it. 2 years later, in the first spring, something strange happened. Medea went for a walk with her father. While they were riding in the carriage, the man was talking to a lady to solve the problem with the food supply. It began to be insufficient due to weather conditions. The girl heard their conversation. Reaching out to her father, she offered to turn to the neighboring kingdom and establish relations with them in order to conduct trade. The man listened. The little lady explained that you could send your warriors to a neighboring kingdom and get food in return. In this way, they will get food, and the knights will get military practice. The Duke was quite surprised at what he heard from his daughter. An unfamiliar lady praised the girl for such a wonderful idea. The man understood that his daughter's opinion was more than correct, but he did not think of it himself. Sitting in the study, he thought about the words of his daughter, which she said this morning. Dvoretsky himself went into the office waiting for further instructions. The Duke decided to act on Medea's idea. The following year, their duchy calmly survived the winter and famine, and her father was even invited to the palace to be rewarded for his very thoughtful decisions. It recognized the hero who saved the empire.